I'm going to do a poem called Growth, aka Goldfish, and feels like an appropriate way to start the podcast.
Let's do it.
Defining myself is like confining myself. So I undefined myself to find myself. They say a goldfish will only get as big as its bowl. But if you put it in a tank, the space can change the way it grows. It needs to have the room, or its potential doesn't show, so its environment's essential for unleashing the unknown. I ponder if it knows that it could grow beyond the bowl, that it could have a pond the size of an Olympic swimming pool, that the world is so much larger than the boundaries that it's known. Somehow I empathize with this little golden soul, because I too have unexplored and unexpressed goals that were suppressed by an environment I couldn't control. Am I still playing small because it's all that I've known when there's a giant in my bones I'm not sure I've ever shown? I ask myself this question when I'm purposely alone. When my body grows to take up all the rooms inside my home, I expand in all directions, every single inch consumed. I'm 1 billion feet tall now, my head over the moon. I look down on the earth as it slowly spins around. I look down on the countries and the cities and the towns. I look down on the square blocks and buildings all around. I look down on my street and rip the roof right off my house. I look down on myself sitting writing on my couch. Look, I barely pay attention. I'm the one that's looking down. How unaware I am of where I am. It's profound. So I put the roof back on and I shrink myself back to the ground. It's crazy how I fit infinity inside my doubt. How I stuff the universe into the tiniest amounts. How I keep the solar system in the corner of my mouth. How I speak into existence, then forget what I'm about. And most days, I'm not sure which side of the glass I've been on. I win a Grammy in the shower every time I sing a song, but when the spotlight is on, my first instinct's to run. I have to super glue my feet to even tell you where I'm from. I've been training for a quarantine since I was very young. For an introvert, it slightly hurts to tell you that they'll come. I would rather get into a staring contest with the sun, although I'll never get to see who won. It's nature and it's nurture, twisting into jungle life, fighting the competition, branching out to reach the light. I tried to listen, but could only hear my ancient heart. It screamed at me to make my life into my greatest art. But where to start? These walls are keeping people out and keeping people in. I guess it's good to know where someone ends and someone else begins. But our boundaries become prisons when we see what could have been. The biggest goldfish ever measured 18 inches snout to fin. Fin.
It's amazing. Every time I listen to you, I think I heard you perform that one at Electric Lounge, and I've read it since then. There's always either a question that I end up asking myself, or maybe some type of perspective shift. Those two things usually occur. And then the third is, which I think is potentially the most powerful aspect of what you do, is seeing vulnerability as strength, as you put it, and hearing you kind of express your emotions as a man and not shying away from that. And I know I had your book, I've had it for a while now, but one of the neat things that I wanted to kind of share with you is I would just flick to a random poem with my girlfriend, Tawny, and I would read out the poem. Or she would do the same thing. And it just created an environment where we both felt comfortable to then share based on what that poem meant to us, or how we could or couldn't relate to it. And I think it sort of just gave us permission to be vulnerable, which I wanted to thank you for, because it really has. It's helped the two of us grow much closer, which I'll be forever thankful for that. And I think this kind of also just connects some dots potentially for the listener who's like been listening to my show for 300 plus episodes. And often the episodes are very science focused. I'll get a professor on and we'll talk about a study or a series of studies. And the kind of motto of the show is to live better for longer. And recently I had a professor on, Mark Schultz, and he has been involved in research looking at happiness and emotional health. And part of his work has kind of elucidated or uncovered that loneliness kills, right? Being isolated, not being connected to yourself and to others, not having these strong interpersonal relationships, it actually manifests physically and is putting people at increased risk of premature death and less satisfaction with their life. And so when I think about your work and poetry and my listener, like I really want my listeners to just have a suite of tools in the toolbox that can improve their life satisfaction. And a lot of my listeners are males like myself who I think tend to be less able or less willing to be vulnerable than women. And to the poem that you just read out there about the goldfish, I feel like a lot of that, and it's certainly in my lived experience, is due to society's kind of expectations of what it means to be a man and what it doesn't mean. And so, I think your writing goes a long way to kind of redefine masculinity, redefine expressing your emotions and not seeing that as weakness.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate everything that you shared, and thank you for the kind words. It's interesting because I grew up without a father. And so when you say that some of my writing gives other people the permission to be vulnerable in their masculine, it's an even bigger compliment. Because as a kid, I didn't feel in my masculine. I felt like I had to look outside of myself for what a man was supposed to be. And I have my own issues with vulnerability. We tend to teach what we need to learn. So because I perform my poetry and facilitate for workshops for other people to explore their own lives through the spoken word, I think people automatically assume that it comes easily to me, that vulnerability is like second nature. But that's not true. My first nature is probably pretty judgmental, pretty closed off. I had a lot of things happen to me when I was younger, and it just forced me to look through a skeptical lens at the world. But what I have found is that being vulnerable, while it can be challenging, is always worth it.
Why?
Because first of all, it's a shortcut to deciding whether or not you want to be intimate with another person. Because if you're vulnerable with them and they don't receive it well, you automatically know you don't want to further that relationship and you can go elsewhere. But 9 times out of 10, if you open up your heart or your life to someone, they can see themselves in the mirror of that honesty, and it opens up a deeper space for you guys to connect. And I think that's what great art is supposed to do, or not even great art, because that's bougie. That's what art is supposed to do. And that's what lives are supposed to do. We share our experiences with other people so that they feel less alone. And when you do it in an honest way, it gives people the permission, or at least the invitation, to go into their own lives and work through memories and release things and have more clarity and peace. And that's why I have dedicated my life to poetry, and why I'm so excited to share it with other people.
Why is it that you think, perhaps in Western culture, expressing your emotions is not always seen as a masculine trait, and might be misunderstood and characterized as weakness?
Well, I think there's a reality to that statement. In certain situations, if you're vulnerable, it is seen as weakness, and people will prey on that. But oftentimes we echo that idea into the rest of our lives. And so we're responding to situations that are not that, like they are that. And in that way, we're walking around with our armor all the time, and it becomes disease, dis-ease. The word emotion is supposed to be energy and motion. And when you don't move the energy, it gets trapped inside of you. And then it can develop into those diseases, or you take it out on somebody in traffic or something like that. So, what you spoke about in terms of giving your audience different modalities for better mental, emotional, and physical, and even spiritual health, this is another way through creativity to move that energy and allow you to have more happiness in your life.
And to kind of be intentional, or shine light on things that you might not want to repeat. So like if I think about, I'm hearing what you're saying, and I'm just thinking about how I grew up and who I want to be today. And back to that poem and the environment, like I grew up in a household, I had very loving parents, but my dad was married to his job. My parents got divorced as a result. My mum would work, day and night shift as a nurse to kind of make ends meet. And so there wasn't a lot of time for sitting down and discussing how we were feeling.
Right.
Right. So that environment kind of conditioned me to not feel comfortable sharing how I was feeling with other people. And B, not getting close enough or intimate enough with other people such that they felt comfortable sharing with me. And I would almost, it still happens now, it depends who I'm with and what my relationship with that person is like, but it would almost kind of choke up because of the way that I grew up. I don't have any experience in kind of leading with the heart and feeling safe doing that. And it's not, though, until recent years where I've kind of being intentional and just, realize I don't want those patterns to keep repeating themselves. Particularly, I want to have kids. Like I want to change the course, and also knowing that if, to your point, like if you're vulnerable, at least to me, you talked about armor, right? I think all of us, to a degree, wear some armor, put on a mask, have different kind of personas. And that can be for safety, I guess. But the downside of that I realized is if you're spending time with like your loved ones and you're wearing this mask, they're never given the chance to love you for like who you actually are, right?
That's such a deep concept.
Yeah.
I really resonate with that. Yeah. How have you come more into your vulnerability and your honesty and your authenticity, not only with the people in your inner circle, but also with, friends who are in that center circle, and even your audience, because, you know, you're a very, I would say, like, present person. And I feel like you're trying to give as much of the truth as you can. I mean, the truth is always kind of like tracing paper. You want to get it as close as possible. But how have you gone about doing that in this transition?
I think one is just acknowledging it.
Yeah.
You know, starting with awareness and not being scared of sharing that. You know, even 3 years ago, I probably wouldn't be talking about this, let alone on a podcast. But speaking to friends about that and realizing that some of these, you know, thoughts are usually shared by other people, which makes it easier. But then I think for me is the important thing is I have this podcast and I want to lead by example. I want to inspire. And so if I think about how I can affect the listener, hopefully in a positive way, perhaps the most impactful way to do that is to just lead and be living proof of the concepts that we're talking about. And the same goes, you know, I want to have a family. My kids are going to, you know, take much more from the way that I live than what I say. And so I think ultimately it's just being honest with myself and realizing that if I don't embody it, then, you know, I'm never going to reach my potential.
I hear that. And I relate to that as well. Yeah. You just kind of have to acknowledge it, integrate it, alchemize it, and move into your life accepting that stuff. And then lead by example. You know, sometimes you have to lead by example for yourself. Like, literally, you don't want to do something, but you say, come on, we're going this direction. And so I love that idea of being the first through the door.